scared. Look at her. Watch her. Signal to the ref. Call the foul. Now watch her do the same thing. Boom. Now, as you guys can see here, now Caitlin Clark do get flat because she lead with this arm here. But if you guys see right here, she's completely cutting Caitlin Clark off. That is a foul. And look at Caitlin sold it. And I'm just loving this from Caitlin. I'm loving this.
At first glance, it looked like nothing, just another preseason possession, another drive to the basket, another piece of contact that didn't get called. The kind of moment that usually disappears the second the next play begins. But this time, something was different. When Caitlin Clark took that contact and no whistle came, she didn't just turn and run back on defense like she had done so many times before. She stopped. She looked directly at the referee. And in that quiet, controlled moment, she said something that instantly changed the energy of the game. There was no yelling, no dramatic reaction, no attempt to put on a show, just a calm, but firm message that carried far more weight than any emotional outburst ever could. And that's exactly why it went viral. Because it didn't feel like a complaint, it felt like a line being drawn. For 2 straight years in the WNBA, Clark had been the player who absorbed everything, the physical defense, the missed calls, the constant pressure, without ever making it about the officiating. She built a reputation on composure, discipline, and letting her game do all the talking. But in that one moment, something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But clearly. And once people started replaying the clip, breaking it down frame by frame, and connecting it to everything she had been through up to that point, it became obvious that this wasn't just about one missed call in a preseason game. It was about timing. It was about accumulated pressure. And more than anything, it was about a player who had finally decided that silence was no longer the best way to handle what was happening to her on the court. When you break the play down step by step, nothing about it should have made headlines, and that's exactly why it did. Caitlin Clark was doing what she always does, reading the floor, attacking space, and putting pressure on the defense. As she moved into the lane, the defender made clear body contact, enough to disrupt her path and affect the play, but the whistle never came. In most cases, that's where the story ends. Players either throw their hands up in frustration, or immediately sprint back on defense, letting the moment pass without much thought. But Clark didn't react like most players. She paused just long enough to make it intentional. She turned, made eye contact with the referee, and delivered a message that was controlled, direct, and impossible to ignore. There was no exaggerated body language, no attempt to involve the crowd, and no loss of composure, and that's what made it stand out. It didn't look like frustration taking over, it looked like a decision. A decision to address something in real time, instead of letting it slide like she had so many times before. Within the context of the WNBA, where emotions run high and interactions with officials are constant, this kind of moment might seem routine at first. But when you consider who it came from, it immediately takes on a different meaning. Clark isn't known for constantly engaging referees or making officiating the focus of her game. Her identity has always been built around execution, focus, and control. So when she chooses to break that pattern, even briefly, it signals that something underneath the surface has changed. That's why fans didn't just watch the clip, they analyzed it. They replayed the timing, the body language, the tone. Because it didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. And once people realized that, the moment stopped being about a missed foul and started becoming about what it represented. To really understand why that one moment hit so hard, you have to look at everything Caitlin Clark had been dealing with long before that preseason game ever tipped off. From the very beginning of her time in the WNBA, she hasn't just been guarded, she's been targeted. Defenses didn't treat her like a typical rookie or even a normal star guard. They picked her up full court, crowded her space before she even touched the ball, grabbed, bumped, and leaned on her in ways that constantly tested the limits of what referees would allow. And the most important part isn't just that it happened, it's how often it happened without consistent whistles. Night after night, possession after possession, she absorbed that level of physical play and kept moving forward without making it a public issue. Even when the contact crossed into dangerous territory, like defenders stepping into her landing space on jump shots, something known to cause serious ankle injuries, she stayed composed, avoided blaming officials, and kept the focus on basketball. That approach built her reputation as someone who doesn't complain, someone who just plays through whatever is in front of her. But over time, that kind of constant physical pressure adds up, not just physically but mentally. It affects rhythm, confidence in officiating, and the overall flow of the game. And when a player continues to see the same patterns without change, there eventually comes a point where silence stops being effective. That's what makes this moment feel inevitable rather than surprising. It wasn't about one play suddenly pushing her over the edge. It was the accumulation of dozens, maybe hundreds of similar situations, where she chose not to react. So when she finally did, it didn't feel like frustration, it felt like timing. Like she had reached a point where responding calmly and directly was no longer optional, but necessary. And once a player, with that kind of history, decides to change how they handle those moments, it carries a completely different level of meaning. What makes this moment even more significant is not just what happened, but when it happened, because the timing adds a whole new layer to the story of Caitlin Clark in the WNBA. Just days before this preseason game, Clark had publicly spoken about the league's new emphasis on cleaner, tighter officiating, rules designed to reduce excessive physical contact like grabbing, holding, and off-ball interference that had been affecting the flow of games. On the surface, her comments sounded positive and supportive, almost like a standard professional response, praising referees for doing a better job and acknowledging the direction the league was heading. But underneath that, there was a subtle expectation being set. By openly supporting stricter enforcement, she was essentially aligning herself with a new standard, one where the game is called more consistently and players are protected from unnecessary physicality. So when that missed call happened against Nigeria, it wasn't just a random no-whistle moment anymore. It directly conflicted with the very standard that had just been discussed publicly. That's what transforms her reaction from a simple disagreement into something much more intentional. It felt like she was holding the system accountable in real time, reminding the referee, without losing control, that the expectations had already been established. And because this happened in a preseason setting, where rules are often tested and emphasized before the real competition begins, it carries even more weight. It's almost like she chose the perfect moment to send that message early, before the stakes get higher and before old habits can settle back in. This wasn't about reacting late, it was about setting the tone early. And that's why the timing makes it so powerful, because it shows awareness, strategy, and a clear understanding that if something needs to change, it's better to address it now rather than wait until it becomes a bigger problem later in the season. To fully understand why situations like this keep happening, you have to look at the kind of player Caitlin Clark actually is and why defenses are forced to play her the way they do in the WNBA. Clark isn't just a high-volume scorer, she completely changes defensive structure the moment she crosses half court. Her shooting range stretches so far beyond the three-point line that defenders can't afford to give her even a step of space, which means they have to pick her up earlier than they would against almost anyone else. On top of that, she's not just a shooter, she's an elite passer who can break down double teams instantly, so sending extra defenders isn't always a safe option either. That combination creates a unique problem for defenses. Traditional, clean defensive positioning often isn't enough to slow her down. As a result, teams lean into physical disruption, bumping her off her path, grabbing subtly off the ball, and trying to wear her down before she can even initiate offense. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. It's the same type of defensive pressure that players like Stephen Curry have faced for years, where constant movement and shooting gravity lead to defenders pushing the limits of legal contact just to stay competitive. The issue arises when that physicality crosses the line and isn't called consistently, because then it stops being defense within the rules and starts becoming an advantage built on what isn't being enforced. That's the environment Clark has been operating in, one where the line between legal and illegal contact is constantly tested. So when she reacts to a missed call, it's not just about frustration in the moment, it's about the cumulative effect of playing in that gray area over and over again. Her response highlights something bigger than one play. It brings attention to how elite offensive players are defended and how important consistent officiating is in maintaining balance in the game. What makes this moment truly important is what it sets in motion from here, because when a player like Caitlin Clark changes how she responds in real time, it doesn't stay isolated to one play, it creates a ripple effect across the entire WNBA. For referees, moments like this naturally increase awareness. Whether consciously or not, officials begin to pay closer attention to similar situations involving that player, knowing that those interactions are now under a spotlight. For defenders, it introduces a level of hesitation. The same physical tactics that may have gone unnoticed before now carry a higher risk of being called or highlighted, which can subtly change how aggressively they approach her on and off the ball. And for teammates, it sets a tone that accountability matters, that standards should be upheld, and that it's acceptable to demand fairness without losing composure. This is how influence works in professional sports, not through loud statements or constant confrontation, but through well-timed actions that shift expectations. Over time, those expectations become part of the environment. The way games are called, the way players defend, and even the way coaches design strategies can all be affected by these small, but meaningful changes. That's why this wasn't just a reaction, it was a signal. A signal that the previous pattern of silent acceptance is no longer the default, and that moving forward, there will be a level of awareness and accountability attached to every similar moment. And once that signal is sent, it's very difficult for things to go back to how they were before. When you zoom out and look at everything together, this moment feels less like an isolated incident and more like the beginning of a new phase in the career of Caitlin Clark, and, in a broader sense, a subtle shift in how the WNBA is being experienced by its biggest stars. Every great player eventually reaches a point where talent alone is no longer the full story, where understanding influence, presence, and timing becomes just as important as scoring or playmaking. This was one of those moments. It showed that Clark is no longer just reacting to the league, she is starting to shape how the game around her responds. That doesn't mean she will suddenly become confrontational or lose the discipline that defines her style, but it does mean she has recognized the importance of protecting her space on the court and holding the environment accountable when necessary. And that awareness changes everything. It affects how officials prepare for games involving her, how defenders approach guarding her, and even how fans interpret what they are watching in real time. It adds another layer to her presence, not just as a player who performs, but as one who influences the structure around the performance itself. Moments like this are often only fully understood in hindsight, when people look back and realize that a small interaction marked the beginning of a larger evolution. And if that ends up being the case here, then what happened in that preseason game won't just be remembered as a viral clip, it will be remembered as the point where the balance shifted, where expectations were clearly set, and where a player who had already proven her skill decided it was time to define the terms of how she would be treated moving forward. As the regular season approaches, all eyes will remain locked on Caitlin Clark, not just to see how many points she scores or how many highlight plays she creates, but to watch how this new edge carries over into meaningful games where pressure, intensity, and stakes are significantly higher. The real test is no longer about whether she can dominate offensively, she has already proven that at every level, but whether the standard she signaled in that preseason moment will actually hold when it matters most. Will officials maintain consistency when the games tighten up, or will old habits of allowing extra physicality return once the spotlight intensifies? Will defenders adjust and play cleaner, or will they continue to push boundaries and test how much they can get away with? And perhaps most importantly, will Clark continue to walk that fine line between controlled assertiveness and emotional discipline, using her voice strategically without letting it distract from her elite level of play? These questions are what make this situation so compelling, because they extend far beyond one game or one call. They touch on how superstars evolve, how leagues adapt, and how narratives are shaped in real time. The truth is, moments like these don't guarantee immediate change, but they do plant a seed, and once that seed is planted, it becomes impossible to ignore. Whether you see it as a turning point, a statement, or simply a natural step in her growth, one thing is undeniable: the conversation has shifted. And as the season unfolds, every whistle, every no call, and every reaction will be viewed through a sharper lens than ever before.